Okay. Can everybody see that now?
Yep,
Yes.
Yes, we got it.
All right. Recognize that, Woody?
I sure do.
Good.
That's a good picture of it.
So I think what we're going to do tonight is Woody and I kind of chatted about this a little bit. I'm going to kind of walk through just a little bit of the logistics of what we got planned coming up this year in July and in 2023 about our trip to Churchill. But I think it's a lot more powerful when you hear from one of the participants, and Woody's going to kind of take over from there, and we're going to play back and forth on what our experience was like last year, and then we'll jump into any questions that you may have about this upcoming trip. So this particular slide to start us off was one on our journey out on Hudson Bay near the mouth of the Seal River last year. And that's one of the plans that we have coming up, is we join the group there in Churchill, where we'll be staying, out on what will be a new ship for them. They've got a new catamaran that actually, based on my conversations with the owner last year before we left, has viewing ports under the water. So you can get down under the water and be able to see the belugas underwater was the whole idea. Plus, it's a real nice stable platform for going out on the Hudson Bay. But this is one of the scenes that we saw last year. There happened to be a group of about 7 polar bears feeding on a beluga whale in the shallows at the mouth of the Seal River when this wolf came out and was investigating the carcass. And visits with our guide and owner from that day said he had never seen a wolf come, or I think one other time he'd seen a wolf come up on one of these tours and interact with the polar bears. So that was pretty special. But this is all about our journey to Churchill, and we'll start off in the town of Winnipeg. And couple activities we have planned there include a trip to the Winnipeg Zoo, where they have a Journey to Churchill exhibit, which was kind of a precursor to the scenes we would be seeing there with some of the wildlife. One of the real fun parts for me is they have a polar bear tank, and these polar bears were animals that were removed from the wild because they were more or less causing problems and not able to be released into the wild. But the tube for you walk underwater essentially in a tube under the tank, and you can watch the polar bears swimming above you. And I really appreciated that, because when we saw them in the wild and realized that one of them had actually killed a beluga whale in open water, to imagine that from watching that polar bear swimming in the zoo was made it a little bit more real for me on how they can actually do that. And then we also have a little bit of a journey over to a place called White. Am I getting? No, that's not right. Oh, I'm drawing a blank on it now. It's essentially a restored old gravel pit. That sounds kind of horrible, but they've done a remarkable job of turning it back into kind of a living history center, a natural area with some open water and ponds. And we'll plan on spending some time there just looking for birds and wandering around the grounds there. But once we're done in Churchill, we'll actually board an airplane and wind up here at the mouth of the Churchill River. I hope can you guys all see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. So we start off here in Winnipeg and fly over this tundra and muskeg up here to the mouth of the Churchill River. We lucked out, I think, on both of our trips last year, that the views out the window were spectacular. Watching this change from a very agricultural, gridded off landscape down here in Winnipeg to a very wild and untrammeled appearances from that altitude. You couldn't see any roads. The only kind of sign of man that we saw was this railroad track that heads up towards Churchill, kind of going across the country. So that was the flight up there was pretty spectacular too. And this is just a kind of a quick overview of what the area around Churchill looks like. This is the Churchill River coming into the mouth of the Hudson Bay here. Churchill lies right here at the tip of this, what's called Cape Mary. And this Cape Mary was one of our first stops with, you see belugas almost instantly as you step out of the van and walk toward the observation point. There were belugas at the mouth of the Churchill River. There were belugas out here in Hudson Bay, which was a bit distracting as we were trying to have a conversation about what was going on. It was really exciting to see all these belugas around us. And we stay right here in downtown Churchill with some really good birding, kind of right in the center of town there. Our excursion, I'm not quite sure which way we'll go, depends upon where the bears are, but we entered out over this direction to the mouth of the Seal River when we did our trip last year, but who knows where we'll wind up. And that excursion is usually dependent on the tides. And we want to be there at a high tide because the tidal range in Hudson Bay is very dramatic, and that allows us to get closer to the shore during the high tide. So that particular journey is dependent on that. And then we've got another day where we've lined up some time with a driver to go birding around the area vicinity around Churchill, and not quite sure which direction we're going to go. Last year we were over here to the east and south at a place called Twin Lakes with some boggy areas. Another option is to come down here in the Churchill River, but we haven't quite figured that out. It'll kind of play off of local conditions and whatever information I can glean from some of my friends that know that area and decide which way to go. And that's kind of the gist of what we do in Churchill. We also have a little viewing opportunity here in the Churchill River and going across to the other point here. And there's an old restored fort where we wound up seeing another polar bear. We walked up to the edge of the rampart of the fort last year after going across in the Zodiac, and Woody's standing next to me and he goes, "Oh, there's a polar bear." And there was a polar bear, and our guide was very careful and got us back out of the fort, not knowing what that polar bear was going to be doing. We got back in our Zodiacs. Turns out he'd actually killed a polar bear right here at the mouth of the Churchill River. And so we got to watch him wrestle with that bear in the shallows from a safe distance offshore. So kind of a quick overview of kind of what to expect during our week in Churchill. Birds, bears, and belugas. So Woody, I'm going to turn it over to you. We haven't practiced that, so I'm going to stop sharing.
And
you have the green share there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just looking forward from your observations as a participant with us last year, kind of what your experience was and maybe what others could expect.
Yeah, sure. I'll take it from here. And I think everybody can see my slides now, right?
Yep.
Okay. And there's our crew at the Churchill Wildlife Management Area. And including John to the right there, and also Angela, who took us around for part of the tour and took some photos for us, really good photos. And there's John by what's called an Inukshuk, which is an Inuit place marker along Hudson Bay. And if you looked at that photo and guessed what time of year it was, you might not think of July. But that's July, and there's still some remnant icebergs floating around in Hudson Bay and a cool breeze. It was in the 50s when we arrived there. It had been 80 degrees in Winnipeg. So this is a rerun from what John already shared with you, our trip. It's about 700 miles by plane from Winnipeg up to Churchill. And like John, I really enjoyed looking down from the plane, because after you passed Lake Winnipeg here, it was all wilderness, no roads, no buildings, no anything. And I don't know, it's good for the soul to see that much country that's undeveloped, at least to the human eye. And there's a lot of it up there. Oh, sorry, I blew it. There we go. Okay. So here we are. We've arrived in Churchill, and we're at that first point, not the first point just out of Churchill. And they have these funny pink chairs that are set up there on the Tundra, welcoming you to the area. And two of our participants there, Amber and Bub, enjoying the cool sunshine. We did a little tour right in the town of Churchill. And one of the attractions they took us to is this building with the very nice artwork on it. And that's a polar bear jail where polar bears that are habituated to people are detained, and then they relocate them into the habitat later. Arctic terns are all around, and I found them fascinating because I've seen them from afar before, or anyway, there's so many of them there. And we even went to a colony of breeding Arctic terns with chicks, which was exciting. And there again, you have the icebergs over Hudson Bay. And there's the Arctic tern. And here's the chick. And as we looked at this chick, I thought, did anyone go up and tell this chick that it's going to fly 1.5 million miles in its lifetime? I mean, it's just so incredible when you stop and think about where these birds are going, what they're doing. And it goes from this little chick that can barely walk around to a bird that takes this journey 25,000 miles a year, going from North America all the way to Antarctica, along the Atlantic Ocean on the European side on its way down, and coming back along South America and along the United States. Just one of the most epic migratory journeys of all. We also saw some other birds in the north, like the long-tailed Jaeger, which flew over us on several occasions. We had redpolls, including this hoary redpoll. Bird of the north, Baird Sandpiper. I'm not going to be comprehensive, don't worry. I'm just showing a few highlights. Hudsonian godwits, the best looks I've ever had at these. And kind of a surprise, at least for me, to see a Tennessee warbler up there breeding in the boreal forest. So on about our second day, we went on a boat cruise up north towards Seal Cove, which John mentioned. The lodge has these expeditions they take you on, Lazy Bear Lodge. And I guess you have a new boat from this one, which we went on. And it brought us up to these guys, which John mentioned before. And at first they were these white specks on the shore at Seal Cove. And we weren't convinced that they were polar bears until we got closer and could see them moving and feeding on beluga whale carcasses. And there were 5 or 6 of them in there, including a cub at one point. And then here's the shot John had with much greater clarity in his shot. But when the wolf came in, that was incredibly exciting to see two, well, a threatened species and a formerly endangered species together. And the polar bears seemed remarkably tolerant of that wolf, maybe because they had plenty to eat. And then this was the second one, the next day at the fort. And we were on the fort, and I was looking through one of the gun slots for birds. And I happened to see this guy looking straight back at me. And I said, you'll all want to look out there and notice this polar bear who's noticed us. And then our lazy bear guide said, yeah, we can look at it, take a few pictures, then we're getting out of here. And he had us hustle back to our Zodiac raft because we had rafted over to this place. But we got a terrific look at this bear. And then we went around the Zodiac, and here's the bear with his kill, which John mentioned earlier in his little cove. And so we got to watch him over there for quite a while. And that was an incredible sighting too. Beluga whales are there by the scores. Western Hudson Bay has tens of thousands of beluga whales, and they gather there in the summertime to molt, to socialize, and to rear their young. And you can hear them all the time. You can see them often. We went out kayaking with them, which is an option when you're on this tour, one that I highly recommend. That's my wife, Lori, in a kayak. And there are some beluga whales to the right. And at first I was noticing everyone else seemed to have the action around their boats. And then one came up right in front of mine and actually rubbed against my kayak. And right after it rubbed, it flicked its tail and sent a well-placed wave right over my face. I think it was playing, and it really knew how to spray me with accuracy. The water was warm, though, despite it being Hudson Bay. One day, Lazy Bear took us on a Tundra crawler, which is this huge vehicle on gigantic tires. You actually have to take a ladder to get up into this. And we went through an abandoned air base from times in the past during one of the wars. And now it's more of a refuge area. And you get a great perspective up there, actually. We saw these trumpeter swans. We saw caribou tracks to the right. We saw quite a few wildflowers that I'm not going to show, but we saw a good variety of them, and that was beautiful. And then in the evening, Angela Mock took this photo of me and Lori. It was our anniversary. It was our 37th anniversary, and what a great, memorable place to have it. And when this picture was taken, we could hear beluga whales behind us, not only doing the sound from breathing, but also little squeaks and clicks once in a while. You could hear them vocalizing behind us. And this is Angela, who took that photograph. And then this is the Churchill River, where it meets Hudson Bay, beluga whales all over the place, and lots of their sounds when this picture was taken. It's a really memorable trip. I recommend it highly to anyone. And those are all my pictures. I could have done a lot more, but it was really a fabulous trip. So there we go.
John, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
Yeah, I just realized that. I knew I was going to do that at least once this presentation. Woody, I was hoping that maybe you could talk about the bugs a little bit, because that does seem to come up, and just your perspective on dealing with the insects while we were there. Now you're on mute.
The insects are definitely there, and they help bring the migrating birds there as well. We wore mosquito netting. In fact, I had a photo that I almost put in my show, and I thought, I'm not sure I want to show this to people, but it's the Lazy Bear Lodge with us wearing mosquito nets as we come out of it. But you need those, and I think they provided them with the tour. They gave them to us. And once you put those on, you get, at least we got used to it. You wear them when you're outside. When you get out over the water, there are far fewer bugs, so that's a nice relief. And of course, when you get into the vans or the boats, you have relief. But it's buggy. It's definitely buggy.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that people knew that that was something they would experience when they got there, so it wasn't a surprise. But I think what I would go back to is the fact that you still said this was one of the most amazing journeys you've done, right?
Oh yeah, and who likes bugs? You know, I mean, hardly anybody likes intense bugs. But the other thing about that, though, is if you want to see the beluga whales, you need to come there in the summer, because they won't be there in the fall. You can go there in the fall and see plenty of bears, but not the beluga whales. So we had that combination, which was really dynamic. Not to mention all the birds, and I had a number of life birds and some really great sightings of northern birds.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really happy with was, like you had mentioned, the Hudsonian godwits, and seeing them in their breeding plumage, in their breeding habitat. And then what was really cool was going back down to South America this year and actually seeing them in their wintering grounds in Argentina. And so completing that kind of life cycle, like you mentioned with the Arctic terns, seeing them in Antarctica and then also seeing them in the Arctic is pretty special.
And I have seen them also in South America before, and I'd seen them in Washington too, but this was the best look I ever had. And seeing them in their breeding plumage, they're really pretty.
Nice. It looks like we've got a question there for you. What were some of your life birds, Woody?
For me, it was the let's see, the
long-tailed Jaeger was one, wasn't it?
Yeah, long-tailed Jaeger, willow ptarmigan was another one
yeah.
for me. And I didn't have a photo of that. Maybe you do, John, but that one popped out along the road, was out for a bit, but it was a great look.
Yeah.
Let's see. I had another one. The glaucous gull might have been a lifer for
Right.
me.
Right.
And you got a beautiful picture of that I almost put up, but I thought you might. When we were out on our boat trip, it was out in an iceberg. It was really an awesome look. So I didn't have a ton of life birds, but I had a few. And then I had such great looks at the Arctic terns and the Hudsonian godwits. And being in that colony of all the baby Arctic terns was really special.
Yeah. We actually had a banded, what was that there? One of our the semi-palmated plover was actually had a band on it. And I reported that. I haven't got any information back on that particular individual yet, but yeah.
You know, another thing to me that was really special is it's where Churchill is kind of where the boreal forest meets the tundra. It's like a dividing point, and you're flying up and you're seeing the patchy boreal forest all the way up, and then it kind of breaks, and going north, it's tundra. And so you get those two major biomes. And not to mention seeing Hudson Bay, which that was a first for me too. And what a vast, amazing place that is, and what a great refuge that really is for beluga whales, for polar bears. It's the largest, it's one of the largest populations of polar bears in Canada there. So it's an incredibly interesting place geographically.
I see somebody else who was on our trip showing up on my video screen there too, Pat. Did you have anything you wanted to add for others interested in this? I'm kind of putting you on the spot. I'm sorry. Can't hear you. No.
Okay, let's
There
see,
you
we've got
go.
a couple questions here.
Okay. Does Lazy Bear Lodge give a seminar on what to do in the presence of polar bears? So we actually have a local guide that Lazy Bear Lodge provides that has all that training. We don't necessarily, the bears aren't in town. And for the most part, we are on a boat when we see them. But there are a lot of precautions should a bear show up in town. And the nice part is people there are very bear aware. I think that was one of the impressive parts about that community versus maybe some of the communities I live in around Yellowstone National Park, is that they are very bear aware and they're all looking out for each other. Everybody's looking for bears, and should one show up in town, it would be pretty well known. And then our guide, as Woody said, was very careful when we saw that bear to get us away from it, even though the bear was still at quite a distance from us, and move us to a safe place. So our local guide is kind of our expert in that. And obviously we follow his decisions and judgment on how we interact with the bears. So there isn't a lot of personal responsibility for many of the participants to know that very well, because we do have those local experts with us.
And those local experts carry big rifles.
And hopefully never have to use them.
Never did use them on our trip.
Right.
There's
a question here about luggage too. Right
Oh,
above my question.
yeah. We didn't have it. It's actually a fairly large chartered airplane. It's not like it's a small bush plane. So I think none of us had any sort of restrictions on the baggage that we brought. So that's one other thing, kind of taking off from that question, is that our Naturalist Journeys group is not the only people staying at the lodge and engaging in these tours that Lazy Bear offers. We're a small group of another larger group of people all doing similar things, but we all stay together in our group and do these activities together. But like Woody said, there's an option for kayaking. And so we allow a couple of days, I think, depending on, again, on the schedule of the tides and when they schedule us to be on the boat. We then adjust our schedule for the day we'll go bird watching, and the day we'll spend some time around town bird watching. But there's opportunities then for these kind of other activities outside of our Naturalist Journeys tour to go kayaking. And then they also have a option for, I guess they called it aqua gliding, where you sit on these inflatable mats a little bit closer to the whales. You can't go diving with the whales, but you can lay on top of the water and interact with the whales.
That
think
show I'm
Woody-
doing for CVLR is Thursday.
Jim, I think maybe, are you asking a
Thought it
question?
was the 11th. It's the 6th. I just got an email.
Jim?
No, I've got nothing. So,
Okay. Wanted to make sure. So there's that option to do some kind of extracurricular activities as part of the tour as well. Any other questions from folks?
Sorry, I did a mute all, John, so you'll have to unmute if you want to chit chat again.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from folks? And please feel free to pop off the mute button, ask a question in the chat for us. Any big icebergs? I see that question. Nothing huge, not like you would experience in Antarctica or there's no major glaciers in that part of Hudson Bay. But there was, as Woody mentioned, and that is a picture of Hudson Bay, the sea ice gets pretty thick. And so you have these kind of sculptured, I would say medium-sized to small icebergs that we were motoring through to get out to where we found the polar bears. So that, like I said, not real spectacular icebergs, but certainly icebergs. And I just love looking at the different ways that water and ice interact to form these natural sculptures out there. It was really nice to be back out on the water. Are there any seats available for this trip? I do believe there are seats available for this trip. You'll contact our staff at the Naturalist Journeys office to get those details. Let's see, I've got a question here. What is the food like? Woody, you want to take that one? Mute again. Thanks, Gary.
I thought the food was very good at Lazy Bear. Kind of homemade stews and different kinds of fish from Hudson Bay, including. And I didn't expect there to be vegetables or salad, but they have these greenhouses and they grow Arctic salad greens, like microgreens up there that were really quite good. So the food was excellent. It's a comfortable place. It's a quaint log structure. It's very homey. And I thought it was delightful. There's a little porch area you can set out if you want to be more in open air. And you're kind of butted up against the habitat. So there are creatures right outside sometimes, and birds certainly.
Yeah.
And you're right in the middle of the little town, so you can walk all around. I noticed somebody else described the town of Churchill. It looks a little like a frontier town.
Yeah.
It's a lot of old log and wood structures and gravel streets. They've got some art displays around town. They've got a general store that has a little bit of everything. It's quaint and charming, and I found it to be very friendly. And you can see rare birds as you're traveling through town too. From time to time.
So Churchill started out as a major grain exportation port because it was quicker to export grain from the Canadian prairies via Hudson Bay to the market than it was trying to get it to East Coast ports. And so it was a domestic deep sea port. That reliance on that activity in town seems to have waned. At the same time, tourism has expanded. So there's a lot of different tourism related people living there. And like Woody said, quaint little houses. They do have a neat little Inuit museum there.
Yeah.
A major community center that sits kind of on the edge of the Hudson Bay in town. And the other really interesting thing I found, Woody had that picture of the mural on the polar bear jail. They actually have a series of those murals. It was part of an art project that originated in Canada. Churchill was one of the communities that was selected for this. So you have these beautiful murals on a number of the buildings in and around town that are very fascinating to see. So like Woody said, easy to walk around in, good birds. We had one morning where we went to this granary ponds, which is close to the big grain elevator port, and had just wonderful little morning there, looking at a lot of the shorebirds and water birds that were around. That's where we saw that hoary redpoll. So yeah, kind of a neat little town. It's probably, the population is probably bigger than I would imagine just looking at the size of the town.
I think it was 900 people, as I recall.
Okay. And Woody, do you recall how many people were on the plane, the overall larger group?
Oh gosh, I don't.
Yeah.
It felt like maybe 30 to 40 in there.
Yeah. But I think that kind of maybe gets at what was the subtext of that question was, did it feel like a big, large group while we were there? And I would say no. It felt like we were kind of almost by ourselves. These other people would kind of pass by us doing their activities, but I'd never felt like there was a crowd that we were part of. They do divide that larger group up into, I think, 3 different subgroups, and our group was all part of a different subgroup. And there were a few more extra people than just our group on the boat tour, but I think there was maybe 20 of us on that boat that day, somewhere around in there.
Yeah, that's about right. No, it never felt crowded.
No. Temperature range. That was interesting. I know the first day we got there was that cold breeze coming from the north off the ice that you could see out in Hudson Bay. And it was a bit of a shock, I think, for all of us coming from humid, quite warm Winnipeg to step out and feel that breeze. What we didn't appreciate at the time, though, was that breeze was keeping a lot of the bugs at bay. And so that's the trade-off between being cold and warm. I think when we were there, it was exceptionally warm, because I just remember thinking I was going to the Arctic, that I was going to be nice and cool coming from I don't like warm. So I'm coming from a hot Montana summer. I was really looking forward to it, but it was like in the high 70s for a number of the days while we were there when the wind switched around from the south. So I would say, 50s, low 50s to 70s is going to be the temperature range, but obviously that's fairly variable depending upon the year.
Yeah, we had people on the kayaking trip. I mentioned that I got splashed, and there was one young woman who kept flipping her kayak over and over again. I think she was doing it for fun, a teenager, but
and
she wasn't suffering when she was in the water, and she didn't have any problems of getting cold coming out. Yeah. But it was balmy for the most part, except for that first day.
Yeah. So I don't know. Again, I don't know what it'll be like this year, but that's what we experienced last year.
Did you have any rain?
No.
No, we didn't.
No, boy, every single we I don't know if we just lucked out with good weather or if Churchill generally has that stretches of that weather. It seems like maybe we had some rain one morning, but it didn't impact our activities at all.
Yeah.
David's got
Okay,
jealous.
I don't know if we have any more questions, but it was awesome for you guys to take some time to share about the trip. Does anybody else have anything they want to say besides thanks for doing it?
Well, I can tell you, I'm jealous of David. He's heading off to Panama with another Naturalist Journeys in July this year. So
By the way, I should say, David, I see that you mentioned the Harpy Eagle. Our current group there got great looks at that. It's just so exciting that they've got an active nest. And we're told that once the bird fledges, it'll probably stay on the nest for the rest of the year. So it's one of those birds that needs a lot of attention from its parents. So most likely you'll be able to see 3.
That would be very exciting. I was jealous when I saw the Brazil trip was also listing harpies. So
I
Connie
wanted-
has a,
Oh,
Go ahead.
excuse me. This is Peg.
Oh,
I
hi,
just
Peg.
thank you so
Hi.
much. I tell you, I feel so lucky to work with Woody and with John, and I'd like to go on every trip that they lead, but I really picked up on the enthusiasm, and what a gorgeous setting. That anniversary picture of you and Lori, I hope is prominently in your home, Woody. That's
Oh, yeah.
terrific.
In our hearts.
Yeah. Yeah.
See,
so
it's a romantic place to go.
And it's great to see Bill Drucker out there and so many faces I recognize. This is the really fun part of the company. And I took a peek, and we do have at least 2 more rooms. So if people join, we're ready to hear from you.
Good. And I see Connie has a question here, and I'm not quite sure I'm understanding it right. Is HB salty?
Yes,
Hudson Bay?
saltwater.
Hudson Bay. Got it. Yep, it's a salt water. And that's actually one of the reasons that the polar bears tend to congregate there in the fall, is because you've got the Churchill River coming into the bay there, which is all fresh water, and it dilutes the salt water. So ice starts forming there because the fresh water freezes sooner than the salt water at a higher temperature. So that's where the ice extends first out into Hudson's Bay, and the polar bears are sitting on the shore of Hudson Bay. When we got there last year, they were just starting to come ashore as the ice broke up. And then they spend, up until October, just kind of hanging out and waiting for the ice to form on Hudson Bay so that they can go back out and kill the seals that they feed on. And I think the belugas, they're starting to probably depend more and get better at hunting belugas, because it's a source of food that can help get them through that lean time when they're waiting on the shore for Hudson Bay to freeze again.
Yeah, and that's become an issue for polar bears. They have to go farther and farther to get out to sea ice and swim even long distances. But that's what makes Churchill the polar bear capital of the world, is what they call themselves, because it's a strategic place where the bears come ashore, spend the summer and part of the fall, and then take that ice bridge that John was mentioning. I wanted to mention Winnipeg quickly. I think Winnipeg was a sleeper. I'd never really spent time in Winnipeg, but we spent time there before and after the trip. And it's a nice city. It's a really interesting, it's the 7th largest city in Canada. It's culturally very diverse. It has a very large Ukrainian population, and people from all over the world, all different languages. It has a world-class museum of human rights, which you might not expect to find in Winnipeg, but it's there, and it's spectacular.
Yeah.
It has a park where the 2 rivers meet, the Red and the Assiniboine. It's called the Forks. Really nice park where they reclaimed what used to be freight yards for trains. It's a very visionary project, I thought, in Winnipeg, and museums around it and food courts. It's a nice place. So that's value added. And the zoo is phenomenal that John was mentioning, with the polar bears right in the tanks. And your story, John, reminded me there were some kids going up near the tanks, and one of the polar bears swam right over, and this little boy panicked and ran off because it was right up against the glass. But you get the scale of the animals and see them swimming around. But Winnipeg is value added. It's not just a stopover point.
Yeah. Thanks, Woody. I really enjoyed my time in Winnipeg as well. Peg, I'm going to kind of maybe put you on the spot again here, but I also wanted to mention that we do have a Svalbard trip that actually goes out on a ship into the sea ice north of Norway. I'm not sure where we're at with that one. I think we were having a hard time finding folks to sign up for that. So I just wanted to put a plug in. If that's something of interest, it'd probably be worth a while to get a hold of Peg as soon as possible. It may or may not go.
Oh, no, it's a go, John.
It's a go. Okay.
The ship goes with its
The ship
fabulous.
goes.
We just
Yes.
need more people to send you.
Okay. So maybe it's a selfish plug.
It is it's a very worthwhile plug. We actually just had a sign up today. It's a gentleman and he would like a share in one of the nice cabins with a window. So that's available. We can still get cabins, and we've got a nice group. It's 5 people. One is Narcomore Craig, who used to be one of our guides. So
nice.
that naturalist, and her partner Jim, and a couple of our regular travelers. And I've done that trip too. And I'll tell you, even just the flight out there to see those glaciers from the air and how they wind across that archipelago. And we were able to really watch polar bears on the pack ice, which is just a really different wild setting. And then we had a den of Arctic fox. I was very fortunate because I didn't know that the Ross's gulls are like ravens. They like carcasses, and so they're around polar bears. It's like, I get it now. I get it why they're so hard. Just have to find a kill. And we're able to see them. And then we didn't have belugas like you do in Churchill, but we did have belugas wrapped up in our gear out on deck, and we got into a pod. So I don't know. I feel so torn. I think everybody should get to the Arctic as fast as they can. It's one of the wonders of the planet, and it's going fast. So having been to Greenland and Svalbard, I just would really encourage you, if you can get away, to think about these things.
Yeah. And the other part with Svalbard is because it's so much farther north, like Peg said, the ivory gulls. And to me, that's one of the cool things about that, is seeing those animals in their environment. And great to see polar bears in Churchill, but you saw from my picture, they're sitting there in willows and green, and to see them out on the ice is just so much more spectacular. And Arctic foxes, I doubt we'll see Arctic foxes. That's kind of a good animal to see in Churchill this time of year, but obviously much more likely dovekies, huge bird colonies in Svalbard. So I just want, since we're on talking about polar bears and Arctic places, I also wanted to put in a plug for the Svalbard trip too. You will not be disappointed in that trip. Any other questions?
John, by the way, is our bipolar guide. You're bipolar guide, Peg. He leads tours in the Arctic and the Antarctic.
Thanks, Woody. We had a really nice trip this year, the month of November, to South Georgia, Falkland Islands, and the Antarctic Peninsula. I think that trip report, I'm not sure if it's up on the website yet or not, but with an extension into Terra del Fuego and a nice hike up to the Alpine area at Garibaldi Pass to look for seed snipe, and it was a spectacular trip. So I'm always looking forward to showing people these places that are so special to me, these high Arctic places, that it just I keep going back.
They're among the most wild places left on Earth. And even when you get out in Hudson Bay, for example, it's a little like Antarctica. There are no boats out there.
Right.
There's no boat traffic at all. And that whole day we went up to Seal River Estuary, which is about 30 miles north. I don't think we saw a single boat going up or back. So it's just us and the belugas and the gulls and the polar bears.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Carrie, for putting up all the information there in the chat. I hope others are seeing that. Carrie's got a bunch of links to our Svalbard trip, the Antarctic trip. And if you have any questions on those, please get a hold of our folks at Naturalist Journeys. We've got Midge has a question here. The tribes around Churchill. So let's see. The Inuit people, and I'm not familiar enough with the Inuit culture to know if there were particular subgroups that we would call tribes, much like we do in southern North America. And then Athabascan Native Americans, I think, as well. Woody, do you recall?
I don't have any more information than that. I think the Athabascan tribe, they call them all First Nations in Canada.
Right.
And I think they're more on the southeast part of Hudson Bay, where we weren't as much.
Okay.
So we were more in the Inuit area.
And
I don't have any further breakdown.
Carrie's got all that information there right there in the chat for us.
Oh, look at that.
Good
She's
teamwork.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I think we should probably wrap it up and I'll get ready to go watch Iowa play in the women's Final Four.
What time is that for you, Carrie?
Well, that's starting at 3 o'clock here, and don't you worry, I'm going to watch it. Thank you both. It was just a wonderful, wonderful Zoom. I really enjoy these so much, and I think people get so much out of them. So thanks for spending the time to put it together.
You're welcome, and thanks for everybody spending the time to join us to talk about these places. It's always a joy.
Okay, hopefully this recorded well, and we'll put it up on the Facebook link to our YouTube page is where it will be. So thank you, everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye.